Welcome to our dedicated series on building financial independence. It's a practical 13-step process. In every deep dive, we move forward clearly, calmly, and tangibly, addressing a new stage. It's specifically designed for salaried employees and really anyone just starting their journey into the world of investing. Welcome back to the deep dive.
So today we are not starting where you might expect. We're not talking about mutual funds or specific asset classes or even, your monthly budget. Our mission today is to begin this entire 13-step process by tackling the two foundational steps. And they deal, entirely with psychology and financial identity.
They really do. It's the essential prerequisite. It's the mental shift that absolutely has to happen before any spreadsheet calculation can actually stick. And this whole framework, it's very methodical, it's practical, and it draws so heavily on the real-world experience of its creator, Tamir Hacham. Right, and the context of his journey is, I think, why this methodology is so relevant for our listeners. Tamir is the creator of the YouTube channel, The Golden Path to Financial Freedom. He was a salaried engineer, and he actually stayed in that role until he was 60. He's often described his earlier life as living, salary to salary for decades, which sounds a lot like many people in high-tech or other stable jobs here in Israel.
Mm-hmm. And that experience gives it critical credibility. He notes that his deep-seated default belief system was simple. Income came only from exchanging time for money. This is the classic salaried operating system. And on top of that, financial education was just missing from his life for a long, long time, even with a successful professional career. It's also worth noting he later translated the financial classic, The Richest Man in Babylon, which really speaks volumes about his own journey toward knowledge.
So what was the turning point for him? When did that switch finally flip?
It's a great little story, actually. He was 45 when he read Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And he describes it not as just, getting new information, but as a profound, immediate shift in his consciousness. He realized he'd been operating under the assumption of an employee, even a highly paid one, and he consciously decided to transition his identity to that of an owner of assets.
And this is where it gets really interesting for anyone listening. That identity shift happened before he acquired any major income-producing assets.
Exactly.
He didn't just quit his job. He kept working as a salaried employee, and that was what he calls his economic anchor. That stable salary gave him the security and, I guess, the raw material that let him learn, read, and then gradually start acquiring assets, apartments here in Israel, and then in the U.S., often starting in partnerships to, lower the barrier to entry.
Mm-hmm. That mental transformation is what enables the calculated action later on. And that translation of The Richest Man in Babylon we mentioned, that itself is just a beautiful small-scale illustration of what he was doing. It's a digital asset. It provides a modest but consistent source of passive income. It proves the concept. It all leads to this guiding strategic principle he crystallized from his own path, which is first financial independence, then wealth. And that sequence is absolutely critical.
Okay, let's unpack that sequence, because that right there is the mental barrier that trips up almost everyone right at the starting line. Why do we have to make a distinction between financial independence, or FI, and wealth?
It's because when people hear financial freedom, they immediately jump to this idea of wealth. The Hebrew word oshek, riches, brings to mind yachts, villas, 8-figure bank accounts. And because that image feels so enormous, so remote, and frankly unachievable for the average salaried person, most people just dismiss the whole idea before they even open a savings account. They just give up.
So we have to simplify the target. We have to make it smaller. What is financial independence defined purely for the purpose of actually getting started?
It has to be simple. It has to be achievable. And it's purely mathematical. Financial independence is achieved when the passive income generated by the assets you own covers all of your living expenses. That is the entire definition. It has to be reliable, time-independent income. That means you don't need your salary anymore.
So we're really just talking about covering your monthly expenses, your monthly nut, whatever that might be, but doing it without trading your time for it. We're not talking about millions of dollars or luxury items, not at this stage.
Exactly. The goal isn't to be wealthy right now. The goal is to be not dependent on a job you might hate or on the whims of a boss or, the constant anxiety of the labor market. That is the first major mind shift. You turn this vague fantasy of being rich into a concrete, measurable objective. I need X shekels per month. And that leads us directly into step one.
And step one is the most unconventional one, the identity shift. Why, in a program that's all about money, does the psychological step have to come before the practical one?
Because the sources are just unequivocal on this. Without this psychological foundation, every other technical, action-saving, budgeting, investing it will eventually fail. Our default setting, especially for salaried professionals, is what we call the salaried employee operating system. We have this deep ingrained belief that money and security come exclusively from work, from a salary. We trade our finite time for what we perceive as security.
And that perceived security is so often an illusion, right? Especially here in high-tech Israel. I mean, take a highly paid employee, maybe they're netting 30,000 shekels a month, they feel secure, the cash flow is great. But what happens if that tap gets turned off? A sudden layoff, a big industry disruption, an illness?
The income stops completely. They're totally dependent on selling their time every single month. The profound realization of step one is just recognizing that distinction. Selling your time generates income, but only ownership of assets and systems generates freedom. Income is temporary. Freedom is time independent.
Okay, but this sounds dangerously close to just, positive thinking. If I'm making a modest salary, say 12,000 shekels a month, and I'm really just focused on making rent, and I suddenly declare I am an owner of assets, doesn't that just invite disappointment? Why does the identity shift have to come before the action?
That's a fair question, and it gets to the heart of sustainability. Think about it with an analogy, like a diet. If you try to force the actions of a person who values health like eating salads, exercising onto an identity that still secretly believes they love eating junk food, those healthy actions won't last. The identity has to come first to anchor the behavior.
So the goal of step one is the conscious transition from defining yourself as a person who works for money to an owner of money-generating systems. Even if you don't own a single system yet, you have to adopt the perspective first.
Absolutely. Think about how a salaried worker thinks about saving money. It feels like a painful sacrifice. It's a deprivation of something they earned. That feeling of sacrifice, of victor, as we'd say, is the emotional barrier that kills progress.
But if your identity shifts to owner of systems,
then saving is no longer that agonizing sacrifice. It becomes acquiring raw material for your next money-generating system. You see that shekel not as something you're denying yourself today, but as a component, a piece you need to build the machine that will generate your freedom tomorrow. Investment stops being a scary, abstract risk, and it becomes the act of building your personal business portfolio. That reframing is the psychological anchor that makes every future financial action sustainable.
I love that framing. Saving isn't deprivation. It's accumulating raw material for the business of you. It makes saving proactive, not restrictive. Okay, so let's assume we've made that critical internal shift. We're now thinking like owners. So we move to step two, defining the vision and converting it to a number.
It's the natural progression. If I'm now an owner of systems, the very next question is, how much money do those systems need to generate for me to be truly free? Most people only plan financially for survival, to close the month and pay the bills. Financial independence requires planning a designed lifestyle.
And this step needs some serious introspection. You have to really define your personal vision, what you want your life to look like if money weren't the problem. And this isn't just dreaming, it's practical, actionable design.
Precisely. Let's take a listener. Let's call her Dana. She's 35, works in an advertising office. She needs a concrete framework to turn this big vision into one measurable target number.
Yeah.
The goal isn't just more money. It's enough money for this specific life.
So how does she avoid designing some fantasy budget that requires an impossible amount of passive income?
That's the key distinction. We are pricing the cost of leaving the job and living the designed life, not retiring to some mega mansion. So first, Dana needs to visualize her ideal day and week. For example, waking up without an alarm, having a relaxed coffee, maybe working 3 hours on a passion project, hitting a Pilates class, and then spending calm, unhurried time with her children every afternoon.
And now we have to attach a price tag to that freedom.
Right. She calculates the costs in 2 phases. Phase 1 is the basics. The cost of her current, desired housing, bills, utilities, food, necessary transport, all the needs. Phase 2 is the vision elements, the things that make the designed life possible. How much are the Pilates classes, the kids' activities, the cost of dining out twice a week? And importantly, she has to calculate annual expenses like family vacations, not the Maldives, but a comfortable pre-priced trip to Greece, and then divide that cost by 12 and add it to the monthly number.
So she prices the whole vision year-round and then converts it back to a single monthly expense.
Exactly. Then she sums it all up. And, this is crucial, adds a 15 to 20% buffer. This buffer does 2 things. It covers unexpected events, and it provides capital for continued reinvestment to keep growing those systems.
So if Dana's total planned expenses, including that buffer, land at, let's say, 22,000 shekels net a month, that's her number. That's her target.
That's our target. And the goal is instantly transformed from a vague fantasy like being rich to a precise, measurable, achievable target. Generate 22,000 shekels of passive income every single month.
And the power of that specificity, it just can't be overstated. It gives every single financial decision a purpose. Is buying that expensive new car going to move me closer to my 22,000 shekel goal or further away?
It acts as a compass. The sources remind us that vision without action remains a distant dream, and life without vision is life without purpose. That number becomes the definition of success. And because we already adopted the owner identity in step 1, every action toward that 22,000 feels like building our business, not like a sacrifice.
So if we look at the entire 13-step path, these two huge psychological steps, the identity shift and the defined vision, they make up the entire first strategic stage of the journey.
That's correct. It's called building foundational consciousness and financial identity. Without this psychological stage, all the technical steps that follow are like trying to build a stable house on shifting sand. The foundation is absolutely the mind, not the initial size of your bank account.
Okay, so once that psychological foundation is set, what does the rest of the map look like, just conceptually?
The map continues with 2 more strategic stages. Stage 2 is building financial resilience. This is where we focus on practical things, order, stability, achieving full control over the money you already have. It's about efficiency and defense.
And the actual growth phase, the part everyone wants to jump to?
That comes last. Stage 3 is economic growth. Only after you have stability and psychological clarity do you actively focus on becoming a robust owner of assets and owner of money-generating systems to scale up those income sources, to pay for Dana's 22,000 shekel designed life. But as we've seen today, everything, the focus, the motivation, the discipline, it all starts with these 2 mental steps.
Which brings us right back to the core concept. The source is stress. All of our financial actions stem from our underlying beliefs. The first step to FI isn't opening an investment account. It's fundamentally shifting how you view money and your place in the economy.
And that leaves us with a necessary, maybe a provocative thought to mull over. It might be worth pausing right now and asking yourself this. Which of my most basic beliefs about money, security, and work beliefs I just took for granted are actually remnants of that old salaried mindset I inherited?
And what would happen if I started examining every economic decision, every potential investment, every saving opportunity, strictly from the new identity of an owner of assets?
The foundational consciousness is now set. In our next deep dive, we will continue our practical steps on this journey and begin the work of building genuine financial resilience.